The hit 2019 release of the 16th instalment of the Fire Emblem franchise, aka Fire Emblem Three Houses, gave us what is widely regarded as being the most successful Fire Emblem game to date. Alongside its branching storyline and rich lore came a vast and diverse range of characters, all weird and wonderful in their own silly little ways. Since the game's early days, fans have sworn their allegiances to the game's multiple factions and will loyally stand by their favourite characters, which was demonstrated spectacularly in the infamous Edelgard vs Dimitri discourse, which ruffled feathers across the board, with Black Eagles and Blue Lions fans throwing themselves into a ferocious battle against the other side, whilst Golden Deer fans mainly took on the role of the spectator, thanking themselves for favouring the least problematic lord. Honestly, it was like the fandom was trying to act out the plot of the game itself, with the Imperial and Kingdom armies constantly being at each other's throats, whilst the Alliance was caught in the middle of it all. Whilst having opinions on the three main lords can be seen as being rather controversial no matter what you say, opinions on the other house members are a little more united. Not a lot, but a little. It goes without saying that, like in all franchises, some characters are more beloved than others, and there may be a common trend in which characters consistently rank highly in popularity polls. There is one particular character who is traditionally disliked at first, but tends to grow on fans as the game progresses. So much so that he ranked 7th on the Famitsu Three Houses male character popularity poll in 2019. Of course, I am talking about none other than Lorenz Hellman Gloucester, since, it's in the title of this video. Lorenz Hellman Gloucester, known for being recruited so that he can get his hero's relic to give to another character. Known for being a ladies' man and getting rejected every time. Known for being the designated character for the Dark Knight class, only to die before he can unlock that class if you don't recruit him. And who could possibly forget that legendary trim? Like I said before, traditionally, people don't really like the guy at first. At first glance, he seems like a bit of a tosser. Common adjectives used to describe him are snobby, pretentious, and also pretty classist. And don't forget the trim. However, as people soon learn, that is only far from the truth, as did I and many fans who would get to know him. So, being Lorenz's #1 fan, I have taken it upon myself to prove that Lorenz Hellman Gloucester is actually a pretty nice bloke. Right, so let's give us all a little bit of perspective, yeah? Who is Lorenz? Who is he really? Well, to start things off, let's have an introduction. Lorenz, middle name Hellman, last name Gloucester, was born on the 13th day of the Garland moon in the Imperial year 1161. In other words, he was born on the 13th of June, 1161. He was born as the eldest son of Count Erwin Fritz Gloucester, bearing a minor crest of Gloucester, and is the heir to the County of Gloucester. Gloucester being a region in the Leicester Alliance. It's a region known for its advancements in agriculture and cattle breeding, whilst its capital, Edgaria, is known for its artistry. Traditionally, the Count of Gloucester is the second most influential noble at the Round Table, the governing body of Leicester, second only to Duke Regan, the head of the Round Table. Lorenz enjoys writing poetry, tea and art, and is also fond of singing, which are all typical pastimes of the nobility. Lorenz is someone who is well aware of the role that will await him in the future, and is equally aware of the rules and duties that come along with it. From the get-go, the player will quickly understand that Lorenz takes his position as heir of House Gloucester very seriously, even going so far as to feign religiousness as to keep up appearances. Even though he is a student at the prestigious Officers' Academy at Garrick Mark Monastery, he refuses to use his days as a student to lounge around and do typical teenager stuff, instead using that time to try and secure a strong future for both House Gloucester and the Leicester Alliance as a whole. Though he is still full of prejudices and has an astronomically obnoxious way of going about securing said future, such as by bombarding female noble students with dinner invitations during his quest to find a suitable wife, and basically stalking another classmate because both he and his father find him suspicious. However, Both of these notable issues with his conduct stem from both a natural and nurtured desire to fulfill his duty as a member of the nobility. Stemming from an influential house, Lorenz has the interest of the wider region of Leicester at heart. This is the cause of his initial distrust of Claude, who, in both his and his father's eyes, just randomly spawned in the alliance and was named heir to the ruling house with no warning at all. Needless to say, he is incredibly suspicious of Claude, and isn't afraid to express his concerns about him to his face. He questions Claude on how qualified he is to rule Leicester, and believes that someone who basically appeared out of thin air is in no way capable of holding the alliance together. Lorenz takes his duty so seriously that he initially intends on exposing Claude as a fraud and ruling the Leicester alliance in his place. To solidify his belief that he would be a better ruler, Lorenz is well informed of the state of affairs within the Leicester alliance, taking the time to educate himself on all things to do with politics and economics. However, the main thing that stands out is that he is willing to back down from an argument when presented with a valid counterpoint. This is seen in his B support with Claude, where Claude offers a valid argument against Margrave Edmund having to lend troops to defend Fodlan's Locket, the key fortress separating Fodlan from the neighbouring nation of Almira. This is a clear demonstration that Lorenz, though passionate in his beliefs, is willing to see things from the other's perspective, and is open to the view that maybe his view isn't the best one. He may be staunch in his views, but he's also reasonable, and ultimately, he aims to do things for the greater good of not just House Gloucester or the Leicester Alliance, but for Fodlan as a whole. Claude recognises this in their A support together, where he realises that Lorenz's concerns about him weren't just due to Lorenz being a little power hungry, but it was because he was genuinely concerned about the future state of his nation, and from this, the two develop a deep respect for each other. An alternative aspect to this duty to Leicester as a whole also extends to the more personal side of Lorenz, influencing the bonds he forms with his fellow classmates. In many of his supports, they usually start off with him acknowledging a classmate as either a member of the nobility or a commoner, and typically involves a lecture on the duty of the nobility, and, if it's a noble classmate, the duty they specifically will inherit. Though there is sometimes an issue with the other character and them inheriting these duties. Lorenz is quick to sniff this out, and is more than willing to help them overcome their issues. Example number 1 is his support chain with Marianne. At first, Lorenz yaps on and on about how Margrave Edmund is a brilliant speaker and how he's sure Marianne will be the same, until he gets the slightest hints that Marianne might have confidence issues. After seeing Marianne smile in a moment reminiscent of the love at first sight trope, Lorenz moves to convince Marianne that she's actually, really pretty, and ultimately helps her become more confident in herself and a good speaker, just like he said she would be. In 3 Hopes, it takes on the form of him learning that Marianne didn't really want to join the army, only joining because her adoptive father didn't really leave her much of a choice. In this instance, he offers to write to the Margrave on Marianne's behalf, wanting to stand up for his friend as he knows she's too timid to stand up for herself. Post 3 Hopes, I'm almost certain that he would end up boosting her confidence just like he does in Houses. Example number 2 is his support chain with Leicester, where he continues to hammer home the importance of thinking of the alliance's future. But once he learns of Leicester's personal circumstances and health issues, he starts to fuss over her health, even going so far as to personally commission the sweetest vitamin-packed sweets for the sweets-loving Leicester, only looking out for her health and is completely understanding of her circumstances. In Hopes, he teaches Leicester that it's okay to ask for help, and even encourages her to come to him if she ever needs any help, no matter the problem. This also extends to people who hail from outside of the alliance. In his Hopes supports with Constance, the two initially have a rather rocky start, with Lorenz insulting Constance's demeanour, causing Constance to insult his character, and the two ultimately forming a fierce rivalry over who is better. However, in their A support, Lorenz is instead greeted with Constance's more depressed personality, and though unfamiliar with this part of Constance, he almost immediately realises that something is wrong and checks in on her, despite the two being fierce rivals. Even though they were meant to be competing against each other, Lorenz instead offers to help Constance, being willing to help restore her house. This demonstrates that Lorenz is kind at heart, and will help anyone, even though they may not be as friendly. These support chains are clear examples of Lorenz looking out for other people, especially the nobility, who tend to be more prideful and less willing to ask for assistance. He is more interested in the wider picture of the Leicester alliance as a whole, but understands that in order to get to that wider picture, you need to deal with the more intricate and smaller details first, those being the individual people that make up the alliance. By lending a helping noble hand to his struggling friends, he helps them overcome their issues, allowing them to improve and, in the future, fill out their roles in a much more efficient way that will ultimately end up benefiting the wider alliance, as well as the actual individuals. Using the examples I gave, by helping Marianne and Lysithea, Lorenz paved the way for an overall improvement in the quality of life for the ordinary citizens in the Leicester alliance, whether it be through specific things like developments in farming or just overall policies that benefit the Commonfolk. This all shows that everything Lorenz does has the interests of the Leicester alliance at its core, no matter how small the gesture. Though this could all just be put down to Lorenz simply being a good friend, but that will still benefit the alliance anyway through the power of friendship. Another strong belief that he has is that the nobility have a duty to care for the Commonfolk. Though many nobles have a laissez-faire attitude towards the poor, Lorenz has the opposite, and this is demonstrated in many of his supports. At first, he initially believes that there is a duty to protect, such as by helping to defend villages from external forces, like when House Gloucester hired Gerald's mercenaries to defend Sarn village. In his support with Leone, this even goes so far that he carries an ointment with him just in case anyone ever needs it, proving himself to be well prepared for dire situations. Additionally, this duty extends to just simply giving advice, as in his support with Ignaz, he advises him on a way to balance both his personal dream with what his father wants him to do, being the first person to actually tell Ignaz that he should just be a knight who also paints. He believes that nobles are there to assist the Commonfolk in their territories, and that acting in a dignified yet proactive way is how it should be. All he requires in return is that the Commonfolk show respect to the nobility. In his supports with Ferdinand, Lorenz is introduced to the idea that nobles should integrate more with the Commonfolk in order to understand their daily lives, as this would make it easier to help them. It's a good idea to break down the walls between the two groups so that the two can cooperate, and Lorenz eventually learns to accept help from commoners in his supports with Leone, despite initially believing that it should only be the commoners receiving help instead. This shows that Lorenz is willing to disregard differences in social class for the sake of cooperation, and realises that all people must work together in order for the alliance to truly become successful. However, this sense of duty can be a little extreme at times, and even comes at the expense of Lorenz's own personal happiness, most notably in the form of marriage. Ever since he was young, Lorenz has been taught that he needs to find a wife that meets a strict criteria, set by the older members of House Gloucester, and he must limit his romantic interest to those who fit into this criteria. The basic criteria he has is relatively similar to what many people have, with appearance, personality and interest all being important things for Lorenz when finding a suitable wife. However, there is one thing that takes priority over the rest of the requirements: class, of the social kind. It has been emphasised in many supports that House Gloucester, initially including Lorenz himself, values social class above all else when choosing a romantic partner. Lorenz doesn't view social class as the only requirement, and is very much looking for things like temperament and appearance when searching for a wife, but social class is the deciding factor. It's the requirement. It takes so much priority that an otherwise perfect romantic partner must be disregarded entirely if she is not of a high enough standing. This is especially tricky since House Gloucester is the second most influential house in the alliance. In other words, it's an extremely classist take on dating, though it's not uncommon for the nobility to act in this way. The reason Lorenz gives for his incredibly high standards is that his choice in wife must also benefit House Gloucester as a whole. It can't just be his future wife's family gaining something from being tied to House Gloucester, his own house needs to benefit as well. Again, this shows the sheer amount of responsibility that Lorenz feels he has, and he again believes that he has a huge duty to do everything he can to benefit his own house, even if it's detrimental to his own happiness. This notion notably shows up in both his supports with Mercedes and Dorothea, two commoner women, where he admits that even if he was to fall madly in love with a commoner, he would force himself to abandon those feelings for the sake of his house. However, as time goes on, his view on this, like most other things, changes. Lorenz learns that perhaps social class isn't as important as his house believes it to be, and it's not something that he should sacrifice his happiness for. Therefore, he is able to take on a commoner as his wife, ultimately deciding that if his partner is a perfect fit for him, it shouldn't matter how influential or wealthy their background is. Saying this, it's fairly obvious to say that Lorenz most likely did not pick up all these strong beliefs out of nowhere. Of course, he got them from somewhere. That somewhere being Daddy Dearest. Now, Mr. Count Gloucester is not the worst parent in the Three Houses story, that award obviously going to Count Varley. He did a good job of raising his son to be responsible and a man who knows what responsibilities he will bear in the future. However, he may have hammered these values home a little too much, as even he is willing to sacrifice Lorenz's happiness for the greater sake of House Gloucester as a whole. To a certain point, especially when it comes to marriage. Considering the social environment in Fodlin at the time the game takes place, you can sort of see why he might have this mindset. The crest system in Fodlin is absolutely insane, and I don't mean that lightly. Having a crest is seen as a ticket for success for the nobility. The nobility don't just desire crests, they demand them, and will even abandon their own children if they lack a precious crest. Case in point, Miclan Gartier, the elder brother of Sylvain. Though the desire for crests isn't as extreme in the Leicester Alliance as it is in the Holy Kingdom of Fargus, you can argue that it's still there, as the majority of the nobility, especially the older members, view crests as vital for a house's survival, and many will keep popping out kids until they finally have one with a family crest. I should probably explain what crests are. Crests, dear viewer, are special biological boons that are inherited by people of certain bloodlines. They were originally gained by consuming the blood of the divine Nabatean race, who descended from the goddess Sophis herself. Some, the ones descended from the Tenelites and Maurice, were gained through the slaughter of these Nabateans, whilst the ones descended from the saints originate from humans receiving blood transfusions from these Nabateans. The vast majority of these crests are inherited by members of the nobility, who largely descend from either one of the 10 elites or from a human who received the blood from one of the saints, though the latter is mostly exclusive to the Empire. As for the Leicester Alliance, these crests originate from the 10 elites, and with these crests come heroes' relics, powerful weapons forged from the same flesh as the blood of those slaughtered Nabateans. A hero's relic can only be properly wielded by a person with a matching crest. If wielded by one with a different crest, the weapon acts as just a regular weapon with none of the increased power that should come with it. If they are wielded by someone with no crest at all, they turn into mindless demonic beasts. Just ask Miclan. Crests often come with unique advantages depending on the crest in question. For example, the crest of Blaethid gives those with it super strength, while the crest of Karen allows its bearer to possibly manipulate the weather. House Gloucester is no exception to this. They bear the crest of Gloucester, which stemmed from one of the 10 elites, also called Gloucester. They have a relic called Thyrsus, a magic staff. Therefore, it's reasonable to believe that Erwin requires Lorenz to take on a noble wife in order to secure the Gloucester line and keep it a crest-bearing one. Since commoners traditionally do not bear crests, as the 10 elite bloodlines became the Fodlin nobility, Erwin may be reluctant to allow Lorenz to marry a commoner because there would be a danger of their future children not inheriting a crest at all, let alone the crest of Gloucester. This could render them unable to use the family relic, whilst also possibly risking the power and influence of House Gloucester among the other nobles, though crests are not as important as they are in Fargus. But since the vast majority of the heroes' relics are in the kingdom, the few that the Alliance do have are crucial in their defence against that pesky nation called Almyra, so a crest-bearing heir would be really beneficial. This, alongside the shared belief with his son that a noble's duty is to simply protect the common folk without being equals, could very well be the reason to why Erwin, and Lorenz by extension, are so hell-bent on having a noble wife, and will downright refuse any other. This is mainly seen in Lorenz's paired ending with Mercedes, where even after Lorenz introduced Mercedes to Erwin saying that he wanted to marry her, Erwin disapproved of the pairing because Mercedes is a commoner. Well, she was born a noble, but it's not as if he knew. However, he then decides to allow the marriage as he sees Mercedes for who she really is, despite her humble status. This shows that Lorenz's beliefs and personality stem from his father, and like father, like son, though Erwin has strong views, he is willing to see things differently and change his mind for the greater good, just like his son. However, pre-timeskip Lorenz did not know that his father would be open to changing his mind, and therefore felt pressured to choose a noble wife in order to satisfy not only his own personal requirements, but the requirements of his father. This once again shows that Lorenz has a formidable sense of duty to his house, and feels pressured to act in a way that will benefit his house as a whole, sometimes ignoring his own wants and needs in the process. Another clear as day example of this is the Three Houses timeskip itself. If you play Azure Moon or Silver Snow and recruit Lorenz in the Academy phase, Lorenz leaves your roster once the timeskip starts, returning back home to Gloucester territory and fighting on the side of Edelgard and the Adrestian Empire. On whose orders? You probably know by now. Despite his friends and the leader of his nation all fighting against the army whose side he is on, Lorenz still stands against them, simply obeying his father, who has sided with the Empire. Again, this is most likely another case of Lorenz sacrificing what he wants in order to fulfill his duty to House Gloucester. However, this might be the ultimate sacrifice, as, if the player doesn't take the necessary steps, it will ultimately cost him his life, being forced to fight alongside dear friends that he studied alongside, and ultimately being slain by one, all in the name of fulfilling his duty to House Gloucester. This clearly shows that Lorenz is dutiful to a fault, but as he is 5 years older after the timeskip, he is more mature, and is more willing to speak up for himself and tell his father what he truly thinks. And with Erwin's willingness to have an open mind, he will rejoin his friends and fight against the Empire. This change shows Lorenz has gained maturity during the timeskip, as he becomes more reasonable and is more willing to oppose the views of his father, using that reasonableness to argue against him and often convincing his father to change his mind. With this, you may call post-timeskip Lorenz a true diplomat. Another key aspect of Lorenz's personality is his sincerity. Call him arrogant, call him snobbish, call him a Tory, but if there's one thing you should definitely call him, it's honest. Pre-timeskip Lorenz, though pre-built with prejudice and a slightly inflated ego, is an honest man. Unlike most people, Lorenz doesn't hide his protests and concerns and prefers to address them as soon as possible in order to find a solution. He makes his words clear and his demands known. He doesn't pretend he doesn't have a problem yet act in a way that clearly shows he does, leaving people asking, "Bro, what's your problem?" This is important, as it shows that he's an effective communicator and values honesty and transparency when it comes to interacting with others. If something sucks, he'll tell you it sucks. If he sees something he likes, he definitely won't hesitate to let it be known. Even though he might spend a bit of time criticizing others, he spends the same amount of time praising others, if not more. But sometimes, the criticism can get a bit much, leaving the other party offended. Lorenz does sometimes intend on offending others, but sometimes he doesn't. And in these instances, once he realizes that he's unintentionally offended someone, he feels incredibly guilty. He willingly humbles himself and apologizes without hesitation, taking full ownership for his mistakes, such as with Leicesther's support chain. Though sometimes he does mean full offence, but later realises that he was mistaken and that his comment was uncalled for, such as in his Three Hopes support chain with Annette. In these instances, he still fully admits to his mistake and will apologise. This only applies to when he realises he's actually done something wrong. If he believes that he's completely innocent, he won't apologise and will stand by his comments and actions, like with the dinner invitations from the Byleth support chain. There can be a benefit from this though, as Lorenz's stubbornness here once again shows his strong beliefs and his willingness to stand by them, not being easily convinced to abandon his ideals by someone else at the drop of a hat. It shows that he's confident in what he does and won't shy away from defending his beliefs, until it hits that he's actually in the wrong. But then he will acknowledge his mistakes and will quickly act to improve on himself, whether it be by making sure to keep an open mind or just treating people with a bit more respect. All of these aspects to Lorenz's character make him a true noble. Well, with that all said and done, Lorenz is honestly one of my favourite characters of all time. Originally, I was drawn to him because of the trim and the absolute hilarity of some of his support chains, but he's honestly a really nice character, and he shows that people can grow and improve, and that's a very important thing to see in a game that centres around a time skip. I hope you guys can agree with my take on his character. Anyway, I've written almost 7 pages of pure Lorenz content, so I'll call it a day here. If you've enjoyed this mediocre coverage of the character of Lorenz Hellman Gloucester from the hit game Fire Emblem Three Houses and its spin-off Fire Emblem Warriors Three Hopes, then please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!